At 09:15 hours on June 30th, 1944, Hauptmann Werner Kortenhaus stood beside his Panther Ausführung, a tank, in a Norman hedgerow, 3 kilometers southeast of Villers-Bocage, watching the morning mist burn off the fields. The 2nd Company, 1st SS Panzer Regiment, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler Division, had 15 Panthers operational that morning. By noon, 11 would be destroyed, 3 would be abandoned, and 1 would escape. The weapons that destroyed them would not be American Shermans or British Cromwells. They would be Hawker Typhoon fighter bombers of the Royal Air Force, 2nd Tactical Air Force, firing 3-inch rocket projectiles from ranges where Panzer crews could not return fire. The Typhoon had not been designed as a tank killer. It had been designed as an interceptor, meant to catch high-altitude German bombers threatening Britain. The aircraft first flew in May 1940, powered by the massive Napier Sabre engine, a 24-cylinder H-configuration power plant producing over 2,000 horsepower. The Sabre was an engineering marvel and a maintenance nightmare. Early Typhoons suffered catastrophic structural failures. The rear fuselage would separate in flight, killing the pilot instantly. Modifications reinforced the structure, but the aircraft's reputation suffered. As an interceptor, the Typhoon was mediocre. It performed poorly above 20,000 feet, where German bombers operated. The thick wings designed for high-speed flight created handling problems at altitude, but at low altitude, the Typhoon excelled. Below 10,000 feet, the aircraft was fast, stable, and could carry substantial ordnance. In 1942, the Royal Air Force began experimenting with the Typhoon as a ground attack aircraft. Initial armament consisted of 4 20mm Hispano cannons, deadly against soft targets but ineffective against armor. The cannons could damage trucks, strafe infantry, destroy parked aircraft. Against tanks, they were useless. 20mm shells could not penetrate Panzer armor except at point-blank range against the thinnest rear deck plates. The solution came from the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, a British research organization exploring unconventional weapons. In 1943, engineers adapted the 3-inch rocket projectile originally designed for anti-aircraft use for ground attack. The rocket was simple, a steel tube 3 inches in diameter, 5 feet long, filled with cordite propellant, a 60-pound warhead attached to the front. The warhead came in 2 types: high explosive for anti-personnel work, armor-piercing solid shot for use against tanks. The armor-piercing version was essentially a 60-pound steel projectile shaped like a pointed cylinder. When fired, the rocket motor accelerated the projectile to approximately 1,000 feet per second. At impact, the solid steel warhead would strike with tremendous kinetic energy, sufficient to penetrate the deck armor of German tanks or damage running gear and tracks. The projectile had no guidance system, no proximity fuse, no sophisticated technology. It was fundamentally a heavy metal object thrown at high speed. But when 8 rockets were fired simultaneously from an aircraft traveling 300 miles per hour, the salvo created a devastating area of effect. If you're enjoying this deep dive into this story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Typhoons were fitted with rails under each wing, 4 rockets per wing, 8 total per aircraft. The standard attack procedure involved a shallow dive from approximately 3,000 feet, releasing rockets at 1,500 feet range, then pulling up sharply to avoid ground fire. The pilot aimed using a simple reflector gun sight. Accuracy was poor. Individual rockets often missed by 50 to 100 feet, but saturation compensated for inaccuracy. A flight of 4 Typhoons could place 32 rockets into a target area within seconds. Testing against captured German tanks in 1943 demonstrated the rocket's effectiveness. A direct hit from a 60-pound armor-piercing projectile could penetrate the thin top armor of a Panzer Mark IV, typically 30 millimeters thick. Even near misses created problems. Rockets, impacting beside a tank, would damage tracks, road wheels, and suspension components. A tank with damaged tracks was immobilized effectively destroyed even if the crew survived. The heavier Panthers and Tigers had thicker armor, up to 120 millimeters on the glacis plate, but their top armor remained vulnerable. Panther deck armor was 16 millimeters, Tiger deck armor was 25 millimeters. Both could be penetrated by the 3-inch rocket projectiles striking from above during a dive attack. More critically, the rockets could damage engine compartments, destroy external fuel tanks, and ignite ammunition stored in hull sponsons. The Royal Air Force, 2nd Tactical Air Force, formed in June 1943 to support the planned invasion of France, received 18 Typhoon squadrons by June 1944. Each squadron had 12 to 16 aircraft operational at any time. Total Typhoon strength available for Normandy operations exceeded 250 aircraft. The squadrons operated from forward airfields in southern England, flying multiple sorties per day when weather permitted. German Panzer crews in Normandy learned to fear clear weather, overcast skies, or rain, grounded Allied aircraft, allowing German armor to move during daylight. But when skies cleared, Typhoons appeared within minutes. The aircraft operated in sections of 4, called a finger 4 formation, providing mutual cover while maximizing firepower. The sections flew armed reconnaissance missions, patrolling assigned sectors, searching for targets. German tanks, trucks, artillery, anything moving or anything that appeared military. The Typhoon's distinctive appearance made it immediately recognizable. The thick elliptical wing, the massive chin radiator under the nose, the bubble canopy. German soldiers called it the Jabos, short for Jagdbomber, fighter bomber. Veterans learned to recognize the sound of the Sabre engine, a distinctive rasping roar different from any other aircraft. When soldiers heard that sound, they took cover immediately. Hauptmann Kortenhaus had commanded 2nd Company since May 1944. He was 28 years old, a veteran of the Eastern Front, wounded at Kharkov in February 1943. He had been awarded the Iron Cross First Class and the German Cross in gold. His company had fought through the Dnieper battles, the withdrawal from Ukraine, the defense of Poland. The company arrived in Normandy in early June with full strength, 15 Panther tanks, experienced crews, adequate ammunition, and fuel. The Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler Division, 1st SS Panzer Division, was among the elite formations in the German military. The division had priority for equipment and personnel. Its Panther Battalion received the latest Ausführung A models with improved optics and transmission. Crews had months of training on the Panthers, understanding the tank's capabilities and limitations. The division's reputation was earned through brutal combat. Leibstandarte had fought at Kharkov, Kursk, and in the defensive battles across Ukraine. On June 6, 1944, when Allied forces landed in Normandy, Leibstandarte was positioned south of Bruges in Belgium, refitting after operations in the east. The division received movement orders on June 7th. It would relocate to Normandy to participate in the counteroffensive that would drive the Allies back into the sea. That counteroffensive never materialized. Allied air superiority prevented large-scale German movements during daylight. The division's march to Normandy became a nightmare of air attacks and delays. Units moved at night, hid during the day, and suffered continuous attrition from fighter-bomber attacks. Vehicles broke down, fuel ran short. The journey that should have taken 3 days required 2 weeks. Elements of the division did not reach their assembly areas until late June. Kortenhaus's company detrained at a rail yard near Argenton on June 27th. The Panthers were unloaded from rail cars, refueled, and moved to assembly areas in wooded terrain south of Caen. The company received orders to prepare for offensive operations. British forces had captured Caen on July 9th after weeks of fighting. German commanders planned a counterattack to retake the city. The offensive would employ concentrated armor, breaking through British lines and exploiting toward the coast. The plan required daylight movement. Nighttime attacks with armor were impractical due to navigation, difficulties, and coordination problems, but daylight movement meant exposure to Allied aircraft. Luftwaffe commanders promised air cover. Fighter squadrons would patrol over the attack routes, preventing Allied aircraft from interfering. Panzer commanders had heard such promises before. They understood the Luftwaffe no longer controlled the air over France. German fighter strength in France on June 30th, 1944 totaled approximately 170 operational aircraft, Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf Fabu 190s, capable fighters but vastly outnumbered. Allied air forces in Normandy included over 3,000 operational fighters. The numerical disparity was 15-1. Even excellent German pilots flying superior aircraft could not overcome those odds. Oberst Joachim Peiper, commanding the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, briefed company commanders on the evening of June 29th. The regiment would attack at 0600 hours on June 30th, advancing north toward Caen along secondary roads through Villers-Bocage. Speed was essential. The regiment needed to reach its objective before Allied aircraft could react. Peiper acknowledged the air threat, but emphasized that movement was necessary. The regiment could not remain static. Static units accomplished nothing. The attack would proceed. Kortenhaus returned to his company and briefed his platoon leaders. The company would advance in column, maintaining 50-meter spacing between vehicles to minimize casualties if attacked. Each tank would have overhead camouflage, netting ready for immediate deployment if aircraft appeared. Crews would watch for aircraft constantly. At first sight of Allied planes, tanks would disperse into the nearest cover and halt until the threat passed. The procedures were standard. Every Panzer unit in Normandy followed similar protocols. The protocols helped, but did not eliminate the danger. Typhoons attacked so quickly that dispersal was often impossible. By the time crews spotted the aircraft and began moving to cover, rockets were already in the air. The company moved out at 0545 hours on June 30th. 15 Panthers in column, moving north on a narrow country lane bordered by high Norman hedgerows. The bocage terrain of Normandy was a maze of small fields surrounded by ancient earthen banks, topped with dense vegetation. The hedgerows provided concealment, but restricted mobility. Tanks could not leave the roads without crashing through hedgerows, a slow process that exposed vehicles to flank fire. Visibility was limited to a few hundred meters. The thick vegetation blocked long-range observation. Tank commanders could see only the vehicle ahead and behind. Artillery observation was nearly impossible. Aircraft flying overhead could see everything. The roads appeared as dark lines cutting through the patchwork of fields. Moving vehicles raised dust visible for kilometers. At 0830 hours, the column halted. A message from regimental headquarters reported Allied aircraft active in the sector. All units were ordered to take cover and wait. Kortenhaus ordered his tanks off the road into the nearest field access points. Crews deployed camouflage netting, covering the distinctive shape of the Panthers. Engines were shut down to eliminate exhaust smoke. Commanders watched the sky. The wait lasted 40 minutes. At 0910 hours, regimental headquarters transmitted the all clear. No aircraft had been spotted in the immediate area for 20 minutes. The regiment would resume movement. Kortenhaus's company returned to the road and continued north. The column made good progress for 30 minutes, covering nearly 5 kilometers. The road wound through farmland, past scattered stone farmhouses, through small villages deserted by civilians. At 0940 hours, a Panther commander in 3rd Platoon transmitted a single word on the company radio net, Jabos. Kortenhaus immediately ordered halt and disperse. Tank commanders scanned the sky. 4 aircraft appeared from the northwest, flying low, perhaps 500 feet above the hedgerows. Typhoons. The distinctive thick wings and chin radiator were unmistakable. The aircraft were not attacking. They were searching, flying a methodical pattern over the bocage, looking for targets. Kortenhaus watched them through his binoculars. The Typhoons were too far away to spot individual tanks under camouflage, but the pilots would have seen the dust from the column's movement. They knew German vehicles were in the area. They were hunting. The Typhoons made 2 passes over the sector, flying northeast to southwest, then banking and returning. On the 3rd pass, they were closer. Kortenhaus could see the rockets under the wings. 2 rows of 4, ready to fire. 1 aircraft broke formation, and began a shallow dive toward the road ahead. The pilot had spotted something, perhaps a tank, perhaps just suspicious terrain. Kortenhaus ordered his crew to take cover inside the Panther. The tank was positioned beside a hedgerow, partially concealed by trees. The commander's cupola hatch remained open, giving Kortenhaus visibility. He watched the Typhoon complete its dive without firing. The pilot pulled up sharply, climbing back to formation altitude. False alarm. The pilot had not identified a target clearly enough to justify expending rockets. The 4 Typhoons circled for another 10 minutes, then departed to the west. Crews waited 15 minutes before resuming movement. Regimental headquarters had not transmitted updated instructions. The attack schedule was already disrupted. Further delays would make the timetable impossible. Kortenhaus ordered his company back onto the road. The column moved another 3 kilometers before the next aircraft appeared. This time, there was no warning. A single Typhoon came in low from the east, following the road line. The pilot had spotted the column and was making an immediate attack run. The Typhoon dived from 800 feet, nose pointing at the lead Panther. Tank commanders shouted warnings over the radio. Crews had seconds to react. Some tanks began moving off the road. Others halted where they were, crews abandoning vehicles and running for the hedgerows. The Typhoon fired its rockets at 600 feet range. 8 streaks of white smoke arced toward the column. The rockets were unguided. Accuracy depended entirely on the pilot's aim and the aircraft's stability during the firing pass. 6 rockets missed, impacting in fields beside the road. 1 struck a hedgerow, exploding harmlessly. The 8th hit the lead Panther on the engine deck. The 60-pound armor-piercing projectile punched through the thin rear armor and detonated inside the engine compartment. The Maybach engine was wrecked instantly. Fuel lines ruptured. Fire erupted from the engine grills. The crew abandoned the Panther within seconds, escaping before the fire reached ammunition storage. The tank was a total loss, immobilized and burning. The Typhoon pulled up sharply after firing, gaining altitude and banking away. 45 seconds had elapsed from first sighting to impact. 1 tank destroyed, 14 remained. But the single Typhoon's attack was a marker. The pilot had radioed the column's location to his squadron. More Typhoons were inbound. Kortenhaus understood this. Every veteran Panzer commander understood. Once 1 aircraft found you, more would come. The first attack was a locator. The follow-up attacks would be systematic destruction. Regimental headquarters transmitted orders at 0955 hours. All units were to disperse immediately into wooded terrain and await further instructions. Movement toward the objective was suspended until air activity decreased. The counterattack timetable was abandoned. Survival took priority. Kortenhaus led his company off the road into a dense grove of trees 400 meters west. The Panthers crashed through hedgerows, crushing undergrowth, forcing their way into positions with overhead concealment. Crews deployed camouflage netting again. Engines were shut down. The company waited. The next wave arrived at 10:15 hours. 12 Typhoons, 3 sections of 4 aircraft each. They came from different directions, covering all possible escape routes. The aircraft flew low, methodical search patterns, looking for any sign of vehicles. Dust, fresh track marks, unnatural patterns in vegetation. The Typhoons carried a mix of rockets and high-explosive bombs. Some aircraft would use rockets against armored targets. Others would drop bombs on suspected concentrations. The first section spotted tanks from 2nd Company despite camouflage. The Panther's angular shape was distinctive even under netting. The Typhoons attacked in sequence, diving one after another, firing rockets and pulling up in a rotating pattern that kept at least 1 aircraft attacking at all times. Rockets impacted across the grove, near misses through dirt and shrapnel against Panther hulls. Direct hits punched through deck armor, destroying engines, igniting ammunition, killing crews. The noise was continuous. Rocket motors screaming, explosions, secondary detonations as fuel and ammunition cooked off. Kortenhaus's Panther was hit by a rocket that struck the turret side. The projectile penetrated the armor and detonated inside. The gunner and loader were killed instantly. Kortenhaus and his driver escaped through the hatches, rolling into the undergrowth as the tank burned. 3 other Panthers in 2nd Company were destroyed in the same attack. 2 more were damaged. Tracks blown off by near misses. 5 Panthers remained operational. The attacks continued for 90 minutes. Typhoons rotated through the target area in shifts. As one section expended its ordnance and departed, another section arrived. The coordination was deliberate. British ground controllers directed aircraft to reported target locations. Pilots shared information about tank positions via radio. The attacks were not random. They were systematic elimination. German anti-aircraft defense was minimal. The division's flak battalion had 4 88mm guns and 16 20mm guns. Most were positioned around headquarters units or fuel dumps. Few were available for protecting forward Panzer companies. The flak guns that did engage Typhoons had limited success. The aircraft attacked from multiple directions simultaneously, making coordinated anti-aircraft fire difficult. By 11:45 hours, 2nd Company had 3 operational Panthers remaining. 12 tanks had been destroyed or disabled in 3 hours of intermittent air attacks. Kortenhaus, on foot now, gathered surviving crew members in a farmhouse cellar. 31 men remained from the company's original 75. Some were wounded, several had burns from escaping burning tanks. All were exhausted. The regimental counterattack, scheduled for dawn, had collapsed entirely. 1st SS Panzer Regiment reported losing 37 tanks to air attacks during the morning. Other Panzer units reported similar losses. The Panzer Lehr Division, operating to the west, lost 42 tanks and self-propelled guns to Typhoons on June 30th. The 2nd Panzer Division lost 28 tanks. Total German armor losses to aircraft on June 30th exceeded 120 vehicles. Losses to ground combat that same day totaled 11 tanks. The disparity illustrated the fundamental problem facing German armored forces in Normandy. They could fight Allied tanks with reasonable effectiveness. Panthers had superior guns and armor compared to Shermans or Cromwells. German crews were experienced. In direct tank versus tank combat, German armor often prevailed, but there were no tank versus tank battles when Typhoons controlled the sky. The mathematics were brutal. A Typhoon squadron with 12 aircraft, each carrying 8 rockets, could deliver 96 rockets per sortie. Assuming a conservative hit rate of 10%, that meant 9 or 10 hits per squadron attack. Against thin top armor, a hit meant a kill or mission kill. A single squadron could destroy an entire Panzer company in one attack run, and there were 18 Typhoon squadrons available. The Royal Air Force could generate hundreds of sorties per day when weather permitted. German Panzer divisions had dozens of tanks. The arithmetic did not favor the Germans. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Typhoon's effectiveness was not primarily due to technological superiority. The 3-inch rocket was simple technology, essentially unchanged from rockets used in the Napoleonic Wars. The aircraft itself was powerful, but not exceptional. The Focke-Wulf FW-190 was arguably a better aircraft in a one-on-one engagement. The Typhoon's advantage came from institutional systems that enabled effective employment of the weapon. British tactical air control procedures developed during the North African campaign created tight integration between ground forces and air support. Forward air controllers, typically RAF officers embedded with army units, communicated directly with aircraft via radio. When ground forces identified targets, forward air controllers transmitted coordinates to aircraft orbiting overhead or scrambled aircraft from forward airfields. Response times averaged 12 to 18 minutes from target identification to first aircraft overhead. The system worked because every component was designed for integration. Ground controllers used standardized terminology. Pilots trained extensively on target identification and attack procedures. Aircraft carried sufficient fuel to loiter over the battle area, waiting for targets. Airfields were positioned close to the front, reducing transit time. Maintenance crews kept aircraft operational despite intensive sortie rates. German attempts to counter the Typhoon threat were largely ineffective. Luftwaffe fighters occasionally intercepted Typhoons, but Allied fighter escorts made such interceptions costly. German flak units could suppress individual attacks, but could not protect dispersed Panzer formations across wide areas. Camouflage helped, but did not eliminate detection. Experienced Typhoon pilots learned to identify subtle indicators, fresh tracks, unnatural shadows, the angular geometry of armored vehicles, even under netting. The most effective German countermeasure was simply not moving during daylight. Units that remained stationary under good concealment often avoided detection. But static units could not attack, could not reinforce threatened sectors, could not retreat from encirclement. Remaining static meant ceding operational initiative entirely to the enemy. Kortenhaus received orders at 1400 hours on June 30th to withdraw his surviving tanks to an assembly area 8 kilometers south. The withdrawal would occur after dark. Movement during daylight was forbidden. The company waited in its positions until 2100 hours, then began moving south under cover of darkness. 3 Panthers, the remnants of a company that had numbered 15 tanks that morning. The regiment assembled its survivors on the night of June 30th and July 1st. 43 Panthers remained operational from the 89 that had begun the day. The division's other Panzer regiment, equipped with Panzer Mark IVs, reported similar attrition. The planned counterattack toward Caen was cancelled. German forces would remain on the defensive, conserving strength, avoiding daylight movement. The pattern established on June 30th continued throughout July. German armor attempting daylight operations encountered immediate and devastating air attacks. Units learned to move only at night or during bad weather. When fog or heavy rain grounded Allied aircraft, German forces moved aggressively, launching local counterattacks and repositioning units. When skies cleared, German armor went to ground. British and Canadian forces learned to coordinate ground attacks with air support systematically. Infantry would fix German positions in place. Artillery would suppress anti-aircraft defenses. Typhoons would then attack German armor with rockets while the armor was unable to maneuver. The combination proved lethal. The effectiveness of Typhoon attacks became somewhat mythologized during and after the war. Immediate post-battle assessments credited Typhoons with destroying hundreds of German tanks. Careful post-war analysis using German records and examination of actual destroyed vehicles revealed more nuanced results. Many tanks credited to Typhoon attacks had actually been destroyed by artillery or abandoned due to mechanical failure or fuel shortages. The British Operational Research Section conducted detailed studies of destroyed German vehicles in Normandy. The research examined approximately 423 destroyed or abandoned German tanks and self-propelled guns in the British sector. Of these, roughly 113 showed definite evidence of air attack damage, rocket penetrations, bomb craters, strafing damage. The remainder were destroyed by ground fire, abandoned due to mechanical problems, or deliberately destroyed by retreating crews. The discrepancy between claimed kills and confirmed kills did not diminish the Typhoon's strategic effect. The psychological impact of air attack was as significant as actual physical destruction. German units that avoided physical damage from Typhoons were still rendered combat ineffective by the need to hide during daylight. Armor that could not move, could not fight. Colonel Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, 21st Panzer Division, wrote after the war that Allied air superiority made German armored operations nearly impossible. Von Luck noted that his regiment could fight effectively at night or in bad weather, but was helpless during clear daylight. He estimated his unit spent 60% of its time hiding from aircraft rather than fighting enemy ground forces. Werner Kortenhaus continued serving with the 1st SS Panzer Division through the Normandy campaign. 2nd Company was rebuilt with replacement Panthers and crews, though never to full strength. Kortenhaus was wounded again on August 8th during Operation Totalize, the Canadian offensive south of Caen. Shrapnel from a rocket attack left him with permanent damage to his left leg. He was evacuated to Germany and spent the remainder of the war in convalescent status. After the war, Kortenhaus returned to his family home in Bavaria. He worked as a mechanical engineer, married, raised 3 children. He rarely spoke about his wartime service. Friends knew he had been a Panzer officer, but few details beyond that. He died in 1998 at age 82. His obituary in the local newspaper mentioned his military service in a single sentence. The Hawker Typhoon remained in RAF service until 1945. Production totaled 3,317 aircraft. The type was replaced by the Hawker Tempest, and later the Hawker Sea Fury. Many Typhoons were scrapped immediately after the war. Only a handful survive in museums today. The aircraft that terrified German Panzer crews became a historical footnote, remembered primarily by aviation enthusiasts and military historians. The 3-inch rocket projectile evolved into more sophisticated weapons. Post-war analysis showed the warhead was actually less effective against armor than initially believed. Many rockets that appeared to destroy tanks had actually only damaged external components or started fires. Armor penetration was inconsistent. But the weapon's psychological effect and its ability to mission-kill tanks by damaging tracks and running gear made it valuable despite technical limitations. The broader lesson of the Typhoon's employment in Normandy concerned integration of air and ground operations. The weapon itself was crude. The tactics were straightforward, but the system that employed the weapon, the forward air controllers, the radio networks, the quick response procedures, the sustained sortie rates, created an effect far beyond what the hardware alone could achieve. German armored forces in Normandy were defeated not by superior Allied tanks or anti-tank guns, but by an integrated system that prevented German armor from operating effectively. Unable to move during daylight, German Panzer divisions lost their defining characteristic, mobility. Armor, reduced to static defensive positions, became merely expensive pillboxes. Their tactical value degraded to near zero. The Germans understood this. Senior commanders, including Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, repeatedly reported to Hitler that German forces could not operate under Allied air superiority. Rommel's reports from July 1944 emphasized that Allied aircraft made large-scale German counterattacks impossible. He requested either substantial Luftwaffe reinforcements or permission to withdraw to more defensible positions. Hitler refused both requests. The Normandy campaign demonstrated that modern warfare required air superiority to conduct mobile operations. Armies operating without air cover could defend fixed positions with artillery and infantry, but they could not maneuver, could not concentrate forces for counterattacks, could not exploit breakthroughs. The lesson would be relearned in subsequent conflicts: Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East, Iraq. But the fundamental principle was established in Normandy in summer 1944 for the men in the tanks, whether German Panthers hiding in the Bocage or British Cromwells advancing behind Typhoon strikes. The air superiority question was existential. It determined who could move and who could not, who could attack and who could only defend, who would win and who would lose. Hauptmann Werner Kortenhaus, watching Typhoons destroy his company on June 30th, 1944, understood that his side had already lost the battle for the sky. The ground war would continue for months, brutal and costly, but the outcome was determined. German armor could still fight, could still kill Allied tanks in local engagements, but could not operate as mobile forces under daylight conditions. And an army that cannot move cannot win. The mathematics were as inexorable as those facing Dietrich von Sorken's Kampfgruppe at Minsk, or the German artillery facing American counter-battery fire. Superior equipment and training could delay defeat, but could not prevent it when the enemy possessed overwhelming systemic advantages. The Panthers were excellent tanks. The crews were experienced. But excellence could not overcome institutional failure, industrial disparity, and the simple fact that British Typhoons owned the daylight sky over Normandy. 3 hours. That was how long 2nd Company, 1st SS Panzer Regiment operated on June 30th before being reduced to scattered survivors hiding in cellars. 3 hours from confident advance to catastrophic defeat, destroyed not by enemy tanks, but by aircraft firing crude rockets from above. The weapon the Panzer crews had no defense against, the weapon that rendered their armor and experience meaningless, the weapon that proved modern war belonged to whoever controlled the air. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.